Hello, strangers. Another Tuesday, another story. This one is number 59. My sister and I have always had a weird relationship. Through our school years, she fell in with progressively wrong and wronger crowds. You know the ones. The kids smoking joints out behind buildings. Kids who sold what they could steal out of their grandparents' medicine cabinets. That kind of thing. If you're looking for a sad story, allow me to provide the one where you watch drugs replace a person you love. My sister's body was present, but it was something else peeking through the bruised slits of her eyes. It used her fine hands, the ones that used to play piano, to rifle through the backpacks and purses of her dwindling circle of friends and family, always looking for something, anything of value, to trade for more of the poison that was killing her. It's a body snatcher's story, and watching her body fly into a frothy mouth rage when she was caught, like a puppet caught in a tumble dryer, was an unnerving, if not terrifying, experience. She'd get arrested sometimes and put into court-mandated rehab, this paired with my parents finally cornering her, and through her crocodile tears she'd either promise to go straight or go to a different rehab, one my parents would pay for. My family wasn't well off, and these stints in rehab cost us financially, a companion cost to the emotional strain she was inflicting. So many times I'd catch her in my room, lifting a stereo, an iPod. The betrayal was real. Someone was wearing my sister like a Halloween costume. That was the only way I could think of it. It was all that kept me from flying into a rage myself. I had to separate her drugged-out state from the sister who'd always given me the larger scoop of ice cream, besides getting her next fix. In that way, I was sort of able to save the memory of my sister away from this monster. But what the monster did still hurt, though, and over the years it hurt deeper and deeper, over and over. All told, 7 years, 4 stints in rehab to detox her body. And it was looking like stint number 4 was the charm. She looked rough, sort of weathered, like she'd always had her hair long and a ponytail or a braid, but somewhere between arrest number 2 and rehab number 3, her nutmeg brown hair had been cut in a pixie. She still had the high cheekbones we both got from Mom, but hers looked a bit hollow in her resting face. Hollow's probably the word I want. But when she'd laugh, it was my sister's carefree, head-thrown-back joy, and that seemed to plump her back up. I caught myself trying to see her as before, trying to pretend the other Molly was gone. Things were like that, torn on the edges, but starting to mend. I mean, Mom wasn't leaving her wallet on the entryway table anymore, but the tension that had kept the air in our home too thin was starting to subside. My parents were trying to learn trust for her too. It helped that Molly, and yeah, if you caught that, her name was Molly, ironically the only drug she didn't do for fear of, quote, her, permanently burning out her happy receptors. Well, Molly was really working the steps and looking to make amends. So when the catalytic converter in my truck started failing, she was eager to offer her own car, what had once been her home, to me in the interim. I asked her if she was sure. I had enough set aside that I could get rides to work or Uber if I absolutely had to. But she was firm, insistent. She told me to save my money, and then, looking a bit ashamed, she reminded me that she still owed me for my street bike. My 2500 Honda that had been traded for Molly's summer plans a few years back. I agreed and felt a little better for it when she showed genuine joy at my acceptance of her favor. With the little turtle keychain chattering against the jangle of keys on her ring, I took her car to work, a flaking gold Eldorado. On the second day I was driving it, I happened to see a maroon Ford Bronco cruising along behind me. I've always had a soft spot for the things, so when I see one, I notice. I was heading down one of the main roads in town. I'd left work to drop something by a coworker's house on the way home. I hit the corner for my left-hand turn onto a quieter, smaller street, where commercial lots gave way to residential. The street was flanked with apartment buildings and corner stores. Though I'd just made the turn on a yellow light, the maroon and tan Bronco had followed me through the intersection and was still behind me. I remember thinking, guess they've got somewhere important to be. My coworker's condo was off a little one-lane strip of paved road between a convenience store and a larger apartment complex. The little one-lane strip of road was one you'd miss if you didn't know to look for it. I made the turn, dropped off my friend's sweatshirt, and a few minutes later was back on the road. Imagine my surprise when I noticed another Bronco pulling out of a neighborhood about a mile down the road, maroon and tan again. And as I drove past, I saw it lurch out behind me. It was the same one as before. Now I was spooked. I had another left to make heading into more permanent houses, little starter homes. As I approached the turn, I glanced in my side view mirror at the Bronco. When my turn approached, I didn't flick on my turn indicator. Neither did the Bronco. But when I whipped the Eldorado into the street opening on my left, that funny feeling doubled up as the Bronco lurched again, made an awkward, ugly turn, and sped to return cozying up to my bumper. This was not good. Worse, the warren of little houses I'd navigated to had a ton of dead ends, and I was only passingly familiar with the one street on which my coworker lived. I was craning my eyes at every street I passed, trying to assess if they were cul-de-sacs or through streets, and, with this hopeful scanning, making quick, unsignaled turns. But every experimental move I made, the driver of the Bronco copied me. I drove past a house with a big plate glass window and caught the faded glint of the Eldorado I was driving. That made a click in my brain so loud I swear I could feel it, like a deep knuckle pop. Why an unfamiliar Bronco might be tailing me wasn't so random if they knew the car as my sister's and assumed the driver was her. After all, she'd lived in this car for 9 months before the final rehab, and in those months she'd been associating with God knew who. Was this a friend? I thought not. Addicts don't tend to have friends so much as victims from whom to steal to score the next high, or co-conspirators with whom to arrange the theft or the trade. Had she stolen from the driver of this Bronco? Had she pissed them off by leaving them hanging, driving off in her big gold car? If you never knew life with an addict, and I sincerely hope none of you have, you probably will think I'm crazy or heartless. But to be honest, I sympathized with anyone my sister had hurt. But that didn't mean I was going to pull over and let whoever she'd wronged take their pound of flesh from me. My phone started ringing next to me. I was so focused on driving through this unfamiliar area that I didn't want to pick it up, didn't want to divert my eyes for a second from the road. I unclenched one hand from the steering wheel to retrieve it from the seat and chanced one glance to see the caller. It was my sister, a flare of hope. Maybe she'd know the Bronco's owner and be able to tell me what was going on. I went to accept the call, but in trying to maneuver it with one hand right as I looked up, saw another available turn and took. I dropped the phone. The neighborhood I'd turned into had a speed bump I wasn't prepared for. I hit it at a speed that jolted the car. I heard more than saw the phone skitter out of sight under the seat. I looked in the rear view. The Bronco was hot on my tail. No way I could chance slowing, ducking, trying to find the phone, nor could I pull over. My phone would have to wait. I started rabbiting. I'd put my blinker on for a left, slow, then make a right. It may have worked. If the Bronco's driver had been nervous, it may have backed them off as I started showing them I was aware they were tailing me. Maybe I could have spooked them away. Of course, if it didn't spook them, I was making a bad choice, because they'd know I knew they were there, and they could decide that now was the time to strike. And as we passed a byroad, and another car pulled out to join the procession, I just knew. They jerked. They hit the gas too hard. They had to hit the brakes to make the turn, but then speed to catch up. That the worst was something I hadn't guessed. The Bronco was not only in full, obvious pursuit of my sister's car. They weren't only aware that I knew they were back there for my erratic driving. They'd called in backup. I sped onto a cul-de-sac, pulled a U-ey, bringing me briefly driver's side to driver's side as they followed in the turn. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I figured if this was going to get ugly, it helped to be able to provide a description to the police of the driver stalking me. I mean, the Bronco could have been stolen itself. Imagine my shock when, pulled alongside them for a couple of seconds, I saw that the Bronco was being driven by an older woman who would look right at home at a church picnic, to the teased highlighted hair and red designer glasses. A look of surprise was stamped across her face. I gasped it, and in my rear view I saw the cars, her Bronco, and the Jeep that had joined the little parade behind me, stop in the cul-de-sac and park. I just made out the driver's side door of the Jeep swinging open before I turned and they shot out of view. I drove home. My sister was on the porch, holding my mom's hand and clutching her phone in the other. They both jumped up as I slammed the car into park and got out, not even bothering to turn off the ignition. Mom and sister and I were all talking over each other, me asking who she'd ripped off, who drove a Bronco, my mom telling me to calm down, and my sister babbling on about how Jill was a real mother hen, what was I doing in that sketchy neighborhood, and so on. It took a bit for everybody to calm down, especially me. While driving, I'd at least been distracted from focusing on how I felt. Now, standing on our lawn, I felt faint, jittery, unsure of how close this call had been. What finally came out was this. The older woman in the Bronco was my sister's sponsor from NA. She'd seen the cars I'd driven past. With Molly's new short haircut, the sponsor had assumed Molly was driving, not her brother. When she saw Molly making turns into a neighborhood with a bad reputation, she'd assumed my big sister was backsliding and took up the chase. I'd slipped her accidentally when I'd made the turn to my coworker's little hidden backyard. When I'd done so, she'd called in another sponsor to come help wrangle my sister. Then my dumb ass had driven past and they'd pursued until I made that ugly 4-point turn and she'd gotten a good look at me. Molly told me that she'd had my school picture on her nightstand in the rehab. It was by that Jill, her sponsor, had recognized me finally. Then she'd called Molly and explained the whole thing, expressing that she was very sorry for having scared me. I was still hopped up on adrenaline, still pissed at the situation, still pissed at my sister, that long scarring built over 1,000 cuts she'd made ripped open. But as she said that last part, I saw it was her fear, her fright for me. It was so different from the fear I'd see on her face when I or my parents caught her stealing or lying. It was real fear for me, and all of my anger sort of dropped. I hugged her and felt for the first time that maybe, truly, Molly had come home for real. I've read that as babies, we are really only born with 2 instinctual fears: loud noises and falling. I'd like to submit a third one for review, because there's not a single person I know that isn't creeped out by the sensation of being followed. Like, comment, subscribe, any mixture of the 3. And thanks. Until next time, take care, strangers.